Of the four types of macromolecules, lipids are the second one that we'll be looking at. Lipids are macromolecules with several functions, including energy storage. So one of the properties of lipids is the same property that makes salad dressing separate. So why is it that salad dressing made with oil and vinegar does separate into two layers shortly after you shake it? The reason for this is that the lipids themselves, the oil, are hydrophobic. Hydro meaning water and phobic meaning literally fearing, whereas the vinegar is hydrophilic, meaning water-loving or water-liking. And literally, the properties of being hydrophobic in the oils are going to make it repel against or move away from the vinegar. And then as a density issue, you can see that all of the seasonings and the tiny bits of mushrooms have settled to the bottom. Typically, lipids are nonpolar and do not dissolve in water. So water itself is a polar covalently bonded molecule and will tend to disassociate polar molecules. Because this is nonpolar, it does not have that slight charge. It's not going to get dissociated or dissolved by water. They generally feel greasy to the touch, and they are a major source of energy storage. There are three basic types of lipids: the fats, the sterols, and the phospholipids. The fats are used for the long-term storage, literally fat in your body, as well as for insulation if it happens to be a critter that lives in cold environments like seals, walruses, whales. There are also sterols, and these include a series of hormones and are largely responsible for regulating growth and development. And then there are the phospholipids, and they're an integral component, vital to cells because they form a substantial portion of the cell membrane. So fats are obviously something that we consume, and while fats get kind of a bad rap because we tend to eat so many of them, they are actually vital. We have to consume them. Fats have a series of components. There is a glycerol head, there is a fatty acid tail. In the case of the triglycerides, there are three tails. You can see each one is a hydrocarbon, so it's made of bonded together hydrogen and carbon molecules almost exclusively. The glycerol head is itself hydrophilic, so it's one of these water-loving substances, and the fatty acid tails are hydrophobic. They are the water-fearing or water-repelling parts of the triglycerol. And in the hydrocarbon tail, it is all of those hydrogen atoms bonded to the carbons that's going to be the main storage element and be responsible for housing all of that energy. Now, fat molecules contain a lot more stored energy than the carbohydrates. For each gram of carbohydrate that you consume, there are 4 kilocalories stored within it, whereas fats have over twice that amount with 9 kilocalories in each gram of fat that you consume. So if you think about it, why is it that we as animals have evolved a preference for these high-fat foods over low-fat counterparts? I mean, our love of high-fat foods is leading to all the problems that we have with a nation of obesity. And it happens that kind of evolution is a hard thing to overcome. Before food was so readily available as we have it today, I mean, you can go to a 24-hour convenience store and pick up anything you want. We can get food whenever we want it, and it's cheap enough that even a significant number of Americans who live at or near poverty are still able to consume food. So why do we crave high-fat substances? Why do they taste good to us? And it is because we have evolved from animals that did not have ready access to food. And if you would prefer, as an animal without ready access to food, low-calorie foods over high-calorie foods, you might just starve. Whereas if you prefer the high-calorie foods, you're going to eat them when they're available, you're going to have more energy stored available, and you're more likely to live until the next time that you can find food. So we kind of are suffering now for the evolutionary history in our past. So there are different kinds of fats. There are saturated and unsaturated fats, and this has to do with the number of hydrogens bonded in this hydrocarbon tail. As we can see in a traditional triglyceride that is saturated, every single carbon has fully bonded with 4 other substances, either the carbon next to it or 2 hydrogens. Saturated means filled, and this is filled up with hydrogens. This is found in most animal fats, whereas the unsaturated foods, unsaturated fats, occasionally have a carbon-carbon double bond, and it does not have the accessory hydrogen bonds. This makes it unsaturated. It could potentially have more hydrogen bonds and causes a kink in the tail. This is common in vegetable oils as well as some types of fishes. There are some health factors. Saturated fats tend to be, as we can see, saturated fats tend to be a little less heart healthy, and so when we're told, eat those omega-3 and omega-6 fats, those are generally the unsaturated fats that are a little bit more healthy. When we talk about partial hydrogenation, one problem with unsaturated fats, like in the oils, is that foods that have unsaturated fats tend not to have as good of a shelf life. If you look at, say, a package of beef and a package of fish in the grocery store, the fish starts to kind of liquefy. The oils start to come out of it, and it doesn't tend to last as long. Same thing if you have something processed like potato chips. The saturated fat potato chips are going to have a much greater shelf life than the unsaturated fats. But unfortunately, the saturated fats also lead to a higher risk of heart disease. The way that you can partially hydrogenate is to take those carbon-carbon double bonds and force in extra hydrogens so that it's now no longer fully unsaturated, it's partially hydrogenated. You've filled up part of those extra bonds with extra hydrogens. So thinking about these with your saturated and your unsaturated fats, which is likely to be a solid at room temperature? And hopefully you answered that both 1 and 3, that a saturated fat and a trans fat or a partially hydrogenated fat like margarine are going to be solid, whereas an unsaturated fat like canola oil or most other oils is going to tend to be liquid. Take a moment to answer this one. And hopefully you answered that the vinegar is hydrophilic and the oil is hydrophobic. Looking on at the sterols, cholesterol and phospholipids are used to build sex hormones and membranes. So the cholesterol is one of those sterols. It is an important component of cell membranes in animals, but it can attach to vessel walls and restrict blood flow. Most of the cholesterol that is produced in our bodies is actually made by our bodies, by our liver. We also can take cholesterol in additionally through the foods that we eat. So if you have high cholesterol, it's important to regulate your diet to limit how much is available for your liver to process. But sometimes even on a highly restricted diet, a person's liver might just produce too much cholesterol, and it might be necessary to take medications such as one of the statin drugs, like Lipitor. Sterols and steroid hormones are other components of the sterols, and steroid hormones regulate sexual development, sexual maturation, and other forms of physical maturation like muscle development, as well as sex cell production, especially in males, and release of sex cells in females. Estrogen influences memory and mood, and testosterone stimulates muscle growth, and it's important to remember that both men and women have both estrogen and testosterone. It's just males generally have far more testosterone, and females generally have more estrogen. And of course, testosterone is available in synthetic variants as well. Apparently, they said that Arnold Schwarzenegger did not have heart conditions related to the steroid use that he had as a younger adult. But I guess that remains to be seen. But testosterone, when you take it as a steroid, can obviously lead to enlarged and greatly enhanced muscle development, but it also leads to a series of other problems. It can lead to sterility, and since it affects mood, it can lead to rage issues as well as uh, excessive amounts of acne throughout the whole body. And the phospholipids and waxes. Phospholipids are a major component of the cell membrane, and you'll see this next week when we start looking at cells. And waxes are strongly hydrophobic. The phospholipid, remember, has the hydrophilic head and the hydrophobic tail. Waxes are throughout hydrophobic. Waxes are a very important part of plants, especially angiosperms. If you look at leaves, the upper surface of most leaves, it has this thick waxy coating, and it forms a protective coating for the leaves.